we're about to start. Your Excellencies, Your Eminence, members and friends of the Macedonian Society, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Tomorrow is the 100th anniversary of the liberation of Thessaloniki from centuries of Ottoman rule. On the 26th of October, the commander of the Ottoman forces, Taksim Pasha, surrendered the city to the commander-in-chief of the Greek army, the then Crown Prince. The significance of the event for the city, for its diverse population, for its development and its rise to Balkan megalopolis will be the subject of tonight's event. The Spanish philosopher George Santayana had once famously remarked that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. It was also Eric Hobsbawm, the distinguished historian who died last month, who said that it is the business of historians to remember the things that other people forget. Of course, people do forget. People often have their history manipulated, massaged, or altered altogether, either for political purposes or for nation-building purposes. From the time of Herodotus and Thucydides, historians had to perform a remarkable service to humankind. That of collecting systematically and methodically, through many filters of objectivity, material in order to form and live a truthful record of events. And yet, interpretation of historical events is also very important, so that causes can be analyzed, motives can be explained, conclusions be drawn, and perhaps, going back to Santayana, lessons be learned. It also helps if those historians come up with a nice story. Historically, some of the great historians have also been very great storytellers. Similarly, the world of literature is full of great storytellers who, through beautiful narrative, have brought alive a whole historical period, depicting social, political, and personal realities of the place and of the period in a way that perhaps a historian does not feel permitted to attempt. Tonight we have a double bill of lectures. We have a historian from the academic field, and we have a very well-known novelist. Talking about double bill and Thessaloniki in the same context, I cannot help but nostalgically reminisce back 40 or 50 years to that era of cinematic double bills in the city's traditional cinema halls. So I don't know if, I'm sure that there are some people who come from Thessaloniki and who remember that era. There must be plenty of you here who have similar memories. But let me not digress any further. The time is precious tonight, and I promise not to succumb to any further digressions. So, our first speaker tonight is Professor Konstantinos Vakalopoulos. He was born in Thessaloniki in 1951. Sorry for divulging your age. He is the son of another great historian, Professor, the late Professor Apostolos Vakalopoulos, who has left an era in the University of Thessaloniki and history studies. He was educated at the German School of Thessaloniki, and then from 1969 at the Philosophy School of the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. He then continued his studies on postgraduate level in Geneva. And as you can see from the CV that we left on your seats, he spent a couple of years there in the University of Geneva, and he studied the historical archives at the Canton de Genève, and he focused particularly in the study of Swiss Philhellenism. Apparently there were very important city archives that he delved with, and he found material that had not been published until then. He then went on to write his doctoral thesis on the subject of relations between Hellenes and Swiss Philhellenes during the 1821 Greek War of Independence. Later, in 1976, he spent some time here in London at the Birkbeck College, just further up near University College, under the tutelage of Professor Douglas Dakin, a highly respected scholar in the field of Neo-Hellenic history. During 10 years of fruitful work at the Institute of Balkan Studies in Thessaloniki, he focused on the study of Balkan history, with particular emphasis in the study of those remote Balkan areas where Greek populations coexisted with other Balkan ethnic groups. In 1986, he was elected professor at the chair of modern Greek history at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Throughout his academic career, he has produced a very high volume of very important work, original studies, and many publications in international journals. He attended numerous conferences and congresses around the world, and he contributed to a multi-volume work, The History of the Hellenic Nation, with a section on the period of the anarchy, 1831 to 1833, if I'm not wrong, Costas, in the War of Independence. The epicenter of Professor Vakalopoulos' work is the deep and analytical study of Balkan realities, but his aim is to continue to contribute to better understanding of Balkan history and to peaceful coexistence of Balkan peoples, and don't we need that? Before I ask Professor Vakalopoulos to come to the podium, I would like to thank a few people who sponsored this event. I would like to thank the London Executive for putting a lot of effort and resources for the success of this event. The Kensington Close Hotel for providing hospitality for our first speaker. I also want to congratulate our new ambassador here in London. Welcome, and we wish you all success at a very difficult time in your duties. Thank you very much. I would like to ask Professor Vakalopoulos to come to the podium.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of today's event, I would like to thank you warmly for the honor the Macedonian Society of Great Britain and to President Dr. Philippos Mavroskoufis has bestowed on me by inviting to speak on the 100 years since the liberation of Thessaloniki, the capital city of Macedonia. In addition, I would like to express my warm regards to the Hellenic Center of London for hosting today's event. This year, it is 100 years since the liberation of Hellenic Macedonia, and of course, of the city of Thessaloniki. Memory is renewed through tradition and consolidated by the historical background and the ongoing research. The historical continuity is ensured through the long-term study of the region and is generally reflected in terms of the critical review of the times. Thessaloniki is the only seaboard city of contemporary Greece that has never, from its foundation till today, lost its commercial importance. And this is because it is located in the most favorable geographical position in Macedonia, in the place where it can most suitably unite the hinterland with the sea and develop a lively commerce between them. No other place on the Macedonian coast offers the advantages which this inmost recess of the Thermaic Gulf possesses. Thessaloniki was founded at the beginning of a great new era in the history of ancient Greece and in more general terms of mankind, the so-called Hellenistic age. In that epoch, after the conquest of Alexander the Great, Greek civilization was spread and expanded to almost all the then known world. This prodigious expansion and penetration of Hellenism into the far distant lands of the East, those lands of dream and fable, gave great impetus to the development of the ancient world. The world, thus newly created, produced new needs which had to be supplied. It was then that, at appropriate points on the great trade routes, great urban centers in which the new life pulsated, were founded or developed. Two in particular became distinguished: Antioch and Alexandria, cities which connected Mesopotamia and India with the Mediterranean. The need was certainly perceived at this time also for close contact between Macedonia and the far distant lands comprising the state of the successors of Alexander the Great. Thessaloniki was founded, or rather was colonized in 316, that is, when King Cassander took as his wife Thessaloniki, the sister of Alexander the Great. At that moment, to do her honor, he gave her name to the new city. The splendid geographical situation of Thessaloniki ensured the city great progress and development with the passage of the years. Thessaloniki quickly attracted and absorbed many inhabitants of the small towns round about. Ships from every corner of the Aegean, from the coasts of Syria, Phoenicia and Egypt, and from other parts, unloaded the products of foreign lands in her harbor. Not only did foreign religions penetrate into Thessaloniki at a very early date, but also various people who resided in the East must have settled there on a temporary or even on a permanent basis, attracted by the commerce of Thessaloniki, which became very vigorous year by year, and predominantly surely were the Jews. So speedy was the development of Thessaloniki that already in the 2nd century it was a great city with a ring of walls crowned by a spacious and renowned Acropolis. In Hellenistic times, Thessaloniki had 2 levels of administration, just as other Greek cities had: a democratic government with a parliament, vouli, an assembly of the people, ecclesia to dimou, and its own civic officials, politiki. The fierce and lengthy wars between Perseus and Romans terminated in the decisive battle of Pydra, 168, in which the Macedonian king was totally defeated. The Romans did not incorporate Macedonia in the Roman possessions, but they divided the country into 4 sectors, 4 autonomous districts. Although the Roman yoke was unbearable, thereby provoking several rebellions, Thessaloniki was named a free city thanks to its position of privilege, and so continued to have a parliament and an assembly of the people. However, with the policy of centralization adopted by Romans, the popular assembly lost power. Political, social, and intellectual life in Thessaloniki was profound and very interesting. With the spread of Christianity, Thessaloniki was to take a prominent place in Christendom. It had the great good fortune and honor of receiving the Apostle Paul and of hearing the gospel of love from his lips. During the period when Galerius resided in Thessaloniki, it is believed that Saint Demetrius, who was descended from a ruling family in the city, suffered martyrdom there. As a young man, he had enlisted in the Roman army and had amazing success in his military career. But he had been converted to Christianity, and his religious zeal so intense that he used to preach Christianity. After the visit of the Apostle Paul, the greatest event in Christian Thessaloniki was the death by martyrdom of Saint Demetrius. The great Christian tradition of the city began to be formed. The saint's cult in particular was to become the most marked characteristic of the religious life of the inhabitants. Thessaloniki, and this was to provide the city's own particular characteristics in the future, was to become a great religious center, the city of Demetrius. In all of this, the Byzantine inhabitants and the writers about the city were to take great pride. Byzantine Thessaloniki, with its great abundance of monuments and with its dramatic history of struggles against numerous different invaders, is more near to our hearts. The existence of its Byzantine monuments suggests even today the splendor of a center of civilization, and in fact, Thessaloniki constitutes a real museum where one can study representative stages in Byzantine art. However, after the accession of Justinian to the throne, other more fearsome invaders appeared as successors to the Goths, the Arabs and the Slavs. Thessaloniki found itself at times in a condition of continual siege by reason of the inroads of the Slav tribes which had established themselves in the neighborhood of the Strymon River. The end of the wars was marked not only by an enormous prosperity of the city, but also by the fact that the Thessalonica brothers, Constantine, Cyril, and Methodius, were enabled in the 9th century by their knowledge of the Slav language to propagate Christianity and Byzantine civilization to the Slavs of the Balkans. Those two missionaries, observes the French historian Rimbaud, brought the Slavs into the family of civilized European nations. To them, the Slavs owe their church, their alphabet, and their literature. In the meantime, the picture of prosperity which Thessaloniki presented during the following centuries was bloated by several invasions, and the heroic resistance against the Saracens, 904, the Bulgarian Tsars Simeon and Samuel, and the Normans who appeared before the city in 1185. The capture and plundering of Thessaloniki was an important event for its fate and prepared the next step as a capital of a Frankish kingdom till 1224 and under Greek rulers till 1246. However, in the first half of the 14th century, Thessaloniki emerged as an important intellectual and artistic center. It was a brilliant focal point for Greek studies with the presence of famous scholars as Koumnos, Magistros, Kidonis, Armenopoulos, and many others. These scholars observed and experienced the social problems of their age. They took an interest in the poor and in the betterment of the condition of the rural population. Their ideas were not confined to the narrow circle Thessaloniki, but spread outside the city of the city walls to other centers of the East also, especially to Constantinople, a city with which they were in close contact. In general, they expressed with animated confidence ideas which indicate a turning point in the development of calligraphy. The production of miniatures, architecture, and painting were also at their zenith. From the 14th century date various small-scale ecclesiastical monuments which are preserved to the present day, the churches of the Taxiarchs and St. Nikolaos Orphanos, the Catholicon of the Monastery of Latades, the Church of the Saviour, and finally the Church of the Holy Apostles with its remarkable mosaic decoration. In point of fact, the 14th century was the golden age of Thessaloniki from the point of view of both literature and art. In the 14th century, as a result of the repeated enemy invasions and civil wars, the economic and social misery in which the lower classes existed was extreme. By the middle of this century, the exploitation had reached a point from which it could go no farther. Amid all this, violent religious disputes broke out between those who defended the mystical ideas of Grigorios Palamas and their adversaries, represented by the Calabrian monk Varlaam, who was deeply versed in theology, particularly in that of the West and in ancient philosophy. The fierce religious disputes of the 14th century were not irrelevant to the social and economic impoverishment of the social strata of the city, a phenomenon which directly correlated with the social and political disarray in the Byzantine Empire. Nevertheless, the spirit of social reforms needed to address the huge social problems was suddenly reversed by the Ottoman danger. The resistance of the last government of Thessaloniki, Manuel II Paleologos, symbolizes precisely the end of an era which was deterministic in content. The final conquest of Thessaloniki irrevocably changed the setting of the city and of Macedonia entirely. This is because Thessaloniki is the central point of Greater Macedonia, and as Thrace and Epirus, the last outposts of Hellenism. Thus, Thessaloniki during the Ottoman Empire from 1430 to 1912 almost perfectly coincides with the fate of the Greeks of Macedonia and the wider geographical area. However, the city still has a cosmopolitan and particularistic color, especially when the population began to be represented by Greek, Muslim, Jewish, European, and Slavic nationalities, both in the center and the periphery. The shift in the situation occurred in the late 15th century with the influx of Jewish immigrants from Hungary, Germany, and Spain. The Spanish Jews were mainly those who were instigators of the great economic progress of the city in the late of the 15th century, a century in which there were many Jewish neighborhoods and 80 synagogues mainly below the Egnatia Street. By the second half of the 17th century, Thessaloniki was a predominantly Ottoman city, with a large population, the seat of the Sajjak Bey, with a Mollah, a judge of the highest rank, and many other officials. Thessaloniki had 48 Muslim districts, 56 Jewish, and 16 inhabited by Greeks, Armenians, and others. The better-known districts included Yedikule, Bardar, Kalamaria, Kortats, Agiou Georgiou, Kazim Pasha, Agiou Dimitriou, and Agia Sophia. The Jews lived principally in the harbor area, directly below the city wall. In 1620, a great fire forced a good number of them to disperse to various places outside Thessaloniki, some of them making for Monastir. The 16 Greek districts were located below the Muslim quarters, on a level stretch of ground in proximity to the gate of Kalamadia. This section of the city was the heart of Hellenism for Thessaloniki, what the Fana was for Constantinople. These districts preserved numerous elements of the Byzantine civilization as well. The houses of Thessaloniki were orientated to the southeast, that is to say, they all faced the Gulf, with the exception of the fine Turkish houses of the western districts, which looked toward the plain of Axios. They were high buildings of dressed stone, divided into separate compartments, and including two or even three courtyards. The houses had red-tiled roofs, windows, enclosed balconies, sakhnisi, outhouses, chardak, and summer houses, köşk. In this environment, the Greek element preserved its social autonomy and survived the inhumane living conditions of high taxation and ongoing Islamization and endless violence. Confined mainly to the urban area of the city around Galerius Arts and Hippodromio, the Greeks of Thessaloniki in the first centuries experienced a significant loss in the area of intellectual cultivation. Certainly, educational things will improve dramatically later in the middle of the 19th century, thereby flourishing remarkably. It is the era in which resistance groups and mobilization were organized in view of the Hellenism of Macedonia, which afterwards rewrote its own independent course. This phenomenon manifests itself in endless revolutionary movements that began to take place immediately after the imposition of the Ottoman rule, and is completed with the resistance of the Macedonian struggle on the eve of the Balkan Wars. No other part of Macedonia, which was subjugated ethnically, fought so vigorously to throw all the Ottoman yoke in order to unite with the rest of the Greeks. That is why the history of Ottoman occupation of Thessaloniki is inseparable from modern Greek history. Greek Macedonians, mainly the northwest and western and central Macedonians, from Sciatisca, Κλεισούρα, Πλάστικα, Στοριά, Φλόρινα, and Edessa, Monastir, Megalovo, Tirnovo, Krusovo, Yevgeli, and Stromnica, essentially a large part of the neighboring state of Skopje, expressed through constant rebellions their unsettling, unnerving, and partisan spirit. The appearance of Jewish Muslims, known as Dönmes, a new demographic element, bestowed upon Thessaloniki a new dimension in European and Balkan affairs. Since the beginning of the 18th century, Thessaloniki was a great commercial and economic importance. While the English, French, and the Austrians compete to access the markets of the East, particularly in Thessaloniki, Smyrna, and Constantinople, the Greeks and those mainly Western Macedonians, as focal point being Thessaloniki, benefited from the Treaty of Passarowitz at 1718 between the Ottoman Empire and Austria, and they transferred as intermediaries, many with caravans, goods from the East to Central Europe. They later established trade routes and trade houses. Without a doubt, the 18th century represents a milestone in the economic development of the city, which is emerging as the most significant economic center of the Balkan Peninsula. Thus, diplomatic representatives and national interests from France, Austria, England, Venice, and the Netherlands are abounding. The city is becoming a center of trade and is becoming mostly a German forwarding hub for industrial products in Central Europe and raw materials in the Ottoman territory. And this is done by following the three main arteries to the Austro-Hungarian countries and territories, having as reference point the city of Thessaloniki and going abroad through Bosnia and frequently via Ceres to Pest, Vienna and Moldavia, and through the valley of the Strymon to Sofia, Belgrade, and Nice. While communication thickens between Thessaloniki and Macedonian urban centers, as well as with the Balkan and Central European large cities, robust Macedonian communities are established with rich educational and social activity. In addition, the capital of Macedonia and the metropolis of the Balkans achieved dominant commercial importance and is characterized by significant trade unionism during the second half of the 18th century. Greek Valak communities flourished in the 18th and 19th century in Monastiri, Krusovo, Nis, Skopje, Veles, Kumanovo, Vienna, Buda, Pest, Belgrade, Sibiu, and in Brasov, Vraila, and in Galați. Additionally, the Greek cultural element came to more communities demographically to Philippoupolis, Mesymvria, Anchialos, Agathoupolis, and Sozopoli, as well as other urban centers. The Greek language became the language of commerce for the elite of the Balkans, and the Greek schools became attractive to the Balkan people, thanks to the presence of Western Macedonians and Epiots. At the end of the 18th century, Thessaloniki continued to be the chief port for Central, if not for the whole of Macedonia. Ships came with goods from all over the Ottoman Empire and from foreign places as well. In Thessaloniki, there were factories producing quality silks and woolen goods, which were in great demand in the markets of Turkey and in Constantinople. The city had consulates by France, Britain, Venice, and Holland, and vice consulates for Germany, Denmark, Naples, and Ragusa. During this period, At the end of the 18th century, the city had about 60,000 inhabitants. Of these, 30,000 were Turks, 16,000 Greeks, 12,000 Jews, and 2,000 foreign merchants, and some 500 families of donors. All these various people were organized in self-governing communities and were dedicated to their own respective religious convictions and attended the churches, synagogues, and mosques. Greeks, Jews, and Edomites were almost exclusively engaged in industry and commerce, while Turks lived on incomes derived from their estates and from interest on loans. The presence of the Greek bourgeoisie in Thessaloniki presages the deeply rooted faith of the Greeks of Macedonia and of Thessaloniki in their future reinstatement. The strong support of the Φιλική Εταιρεία in Thessaloniki and the wider Macedonian area cultivated and prepared the ground for the broad participation of the Greek element in the national movement of 1821. The idea of the Greek Revolution was born in the Greek communities of the present Balkan states and Central Europe. Also, the formation of the Φιλική Εταιρεία, pioneered by Epirotes, Macedonians, and Thracians. The revolutionary movement of 1821 in Macedonia, as well as in Epirus and Thrace, created the foundation for the most effective confrontation with the Ottoman factors on behalf of the southern Greeks. Mass execution of Greek fighters, even in Thessaloniki, as well as the total catastrophe of intellectual institutions, brought about the image of a wrecked city. Many Macedonian fighters of 1821 consequently took refuge in southern Greece to back their compatriots. Soon after, from the establishment of the Greek state in 1830, Thessaloniki and the Macedonian area experienced unprecedented growth and were developed by the mid of the 19th century to become vital centers of international commerce. The unprecedented economic growth of multicultural Thessaloniki and its Macedonian hinterland will provoke an analogous intellectual evolution of the ethnic groups, a phenomenon which will shape the real identity of the city. Jewish, European, and Greek trading houses dominated Thessaloniki and the larger urban centers in Macedonia, possessing numerous establishments domestically and abroad. Thessaloniki will be connected by railway to the Balkans and by sea with the European ports. The global conjunctures, first the Crimean War from 1853 to 1856, and then the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865, combined with the Ottoman reforms of Tanzimat, changed the face of things and provided a huge impetus to the Macedonian area and its metropolis. The search for agricultural products due to the wartime events of the Crimean War and the shortage of cotton during the American Civil War gave the opportunity to the Macedonian hinterland to meet the huge demand arising. First Jews and then Greeks, but also the Europeans of Thessaloniki accumulated great wealth and investments in real estate, buying out the Ottoman big estates and large stretches of Ottoman land. In this way, the Greek and as well as Jewish interests were incorporated into numerous and robust guilds. They lived in separate city neighborhoods and in specific urban areas, prolonging a fixed division, culturally speaking, albeit competing in all social spheres. In contrast to all other ethnic groups and their economic and cultural evolution, the Greeks of Thessaloniki, and especially of the wider Macedonian area, were the only group that participated actively in the numerous revolutionary liberation movements and for the unification with the Greek state. Firstly, during the Cretan uprising in 1841, then during the Crimean War, after in 1866 to 1869 when they rushed to help the Cretans during their big revolution And afterwards, in 1878, due to the Russo-Turkish War of 1877, the movement of the Ethnici Eteria at 1894, and finally during the Macedonian struggle, when Athanasios Philiotis Nikolaidis founded the Organosis Thessaloniki in 1906 and organized an armed defense in the city against the strong Bulgarian presence, which was concentrated around the old railway station. If in Thessaloniki, July 1908, the epoch-making event which could change the flux of things had not occurred, it is certain that the Greek organization would have fully dominated southern and upper Macedonia. Nevertheless, the Young Turks promised equality before the law and amnesty to their opponents. The reason for this was because the Sultan was sending dissident officials to serve who believed that the Sultan's presence at Ottoman's management model were the culprits behind the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. In Thessaloniki and in the wider Macedonian area, the Ottoman nationalists felt humiliated due to the harsh and long-term Christian rebel struggle. The Young Turks were born there, and also among them Islamized Jews who promised constitutional liberties, but they schemed and organized the genocide of the ethnic minorities in the Ottoman territory. Despite all this, the movement of the Young Turks of July 1908 in Thessaloniki provided an incentive for the formation of the Balkan rapprochement. Greek, Bulgarian, Serbian and Armenian members of the Ottoman Parliament after 1909 prepared the ground for the agreement of the Balkan states and constituted a joint front against the common danger. The Balkan Wars were the work of the Christian members of the Ottoman Parliament. As regards the Greek side, the Balkan Wars culminated in the crowning achievement of the century-long struggles of the subjugated Greeks of Macedonia and other territories of the Ottoman state. This was regardless of the fact that many of their compatriots of Upper Macedonia remained outside the borders of the Greek territory and were trapped on neighboring Macedonia, Serbia. The liberation of Thessaloniki by the Greek army created the preconditions for a new beginning during the 20th century. The fate of the city and of the greater geographic region was inextricably connected with the destiny of the rest of Hellenism. Nonetheless, two important details continue to characterize the historic path of Thessaloniki in the new century. Firstly, Thessaloniki's Balkan and secondly, European characteristics, as well as the events that continue to make the city the apple of discord in international disputes. These appeared to be in sharp relief during the anguishing Greek civil strife between Venizelis and Royalists. The second decidedly significant issue was regarding Thessaloniki and Macedonia of the interwar period, since Greek Macedonia and its capital evolved into the melting pot of more than half of the refugee population after 1922. North Greek Hellenism appeared as a miniature of the world of Greater Hellenism. From Asia Minor, Pontus, Eastern and Northern Thrace, mixed with Greek-speaking, Slav-speaking, Vlach-speaking, thus becoming the biggest and almost shocking melting pot of the new Greek reality. Macedonia emerged as the point of attraction for all of Hellenism after being called on to balance all the centrifugal tendencies, as well as having to arrive at a compromise in the conflicting historical experience. All those who established themselves contributed without a doubt to the ethnological consolidation of the region and systematically altered its demographic makeup. Gradually, Gradually, during the interwar period, and of course afterwards, the Greek character emerges in the capital of the Macedonian region. The unique attribute of Thessaloniki to chisel out of the cultural, all of the cultural influences in an incomparable way during its century-long history, and the way it created its own personality, its own imprint in the Eastern Mediterranean, constitutes her as a crossroads of a vast cultural ensemble. This gives her an universal dynamism and dimension. The specific quality of Thessaloniki, the triple origins, ancient Greece, Byzantium, modern Hellenism, becomes the basis for the future development, thereby meeting the expectations of its inhabitants. The Balkan, as well as the European character of the city, paved the way for a peaceful and harmonious coexistence with the neighboring people, continuing in this manner a century-long tradition. For modern Greeks, the historical meaning of Macedonia refers to its lively and indelible tradition. The memory comes to mind of the Macedonian suffering, a symbol of continuous struggle against those who subjugated its territorial integrity of the specific geographical area. The vision of Macedonia, which will also continue to remain untouched, which Ion Dragoumis used to identify with the school of freedom. For all Greeks to purify themselves and induce them to believe in something holy, something different, a workshop of internal perfection and energy with a view to revitalizing the nation. The nation, according to Dragoumis, requires two things: a Macedonia and a teacher school. Macedonia would be the school for lads and freemen, where all Greeks would complement their studies and would experience real life, and not that life of corruption, partisan wrangling, and the languid and irresolute government who had left the subjugated Greeks of Macedonia to fend for themselves. The teacher school would be a school which would nurture and educate competent, well-trained and free teachers, δημοτικιστές. The living language of the people was the only condition for the continuity and cohesion of the nation, and Macedonia a living social and national fabric. Thessaloniki, as the capital of historical Macedonia, is now understood as being a place attractive and bringing closer to it all Balkan people, since due to its geographical location, renders it as being an essential reference point both on the Balkan and the Southern European map. The prospects for growth in the Macedonian hinterland will always depend on good neighborly relations and respect for the borders, as those were established after the Balkan Wars, and the will of the Greek state to consolidate an inter-Balkan reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Vakalopoulos. Can I now invite our Vice President, Natasha Svenzouri, to introduce our second speaker for tonight, Mrs. Victoria Hislop.
We are delighted to have a very special person with us tonight, the novelist, journalist and writer Victoria Hislop. Victoria was born in Kent, read English at St. Hilda's College, Oxford. Later worked in book publishing and then in public relations. In 1990, Victoria began working as a freelance journalist, a career which gave her the opportunity to travel all over the world, enabling her to gain experiences and learn different cultures and ways of living. Victoria was the newcomer of the year at the Galaxy British Book Awards 2007 and also won the Richard and Judy Summer Read competition. A trip to the former leper colony on the island of Spinaloka in Crete resulted in her first novel, The Island, which was published in 2006 and sold over 1 million copies in the UK and more than 2 million copies worldwide. Her third book, The Thread, published in 2011, is the best-seller novel that spans nearly 100 years of history of the city of Thessaloniki, Greece. When she first visited Thessaloniki, the vibrancy of the city inspired her and made her research the history of the city. The result of that inspiration and research is The Thread, which is a magnificent story of love and friendship that endures through the catastrophes and upheavals of the 20th century, from the Great Fire in 1917 to the Civil War and later to the German occupation. Victoria makes the city of Thessaloniki internationally known as a place worthy of a visit. Also, with this book, Victoria allows the reader to see beyond Greece's current troubles. Victoria visits Greece very often, has many Greek friends, loves Greek food, is learning Greek, but most of all, Victoria is a great Philhellene. Tonight, Victoria will present her personal view of finding inspiration in Thessaloniki, turning fact into fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Victoria.
Sevasmiotate. Thank you very much for your welcome. I'm going to continue to speak in English, which seems a little bit unfair given that the professor delivered his lecture in English and I should really speak in Greek, but I think it will be much less painful for all of us. Thank you so much for the great honour of the Society for inviting me to speak tonight. And it's slightly strange to come and talk about a city that I first visited only 5 years ago, which seems extraordinary actually to me because it became an obsession for me, this wonderful city. I'm very much a newcomer to Thessaloniki, so I hope my observation and my love for it doesn't necessarily reflect the sort of brevity of the time I've known it. Interestingly, although I'd been going to Greece for nearly 30 years when I first went to Thessaloniki, my first glimpses of that city were not very favourable. I'll be very, very honest with you. It wasn't love at first sight by any means at all. And I'd had a very different experience when I went to Athens in the 70s and really loved that city immediately. But I remember very distinctly looking out of the aeroplane window as I was coming in to land in Thessaloniki and not really recognising this as the Greece that I knew. It looked very organised with all the sort of fields laid out, and much wetter and much more fertile really than the land I knew as Greece. And then when I arrived there, the first thing I did was go to the university campus, probably yours, Professor, and I was rather shocked. I've now come to understand why this university was covered in graffiti. It seemed very different from the place where I'd been educated in Oxford, whereas if you'd written your initial on a wall, you'd have been sent down. But clearly in Thessaloniki, these kind of passionate political views were welcomed on the walls. But I felt myself rather alarmed by this, and I thought, what kind of city have I come to? But the next day, I was there to actually speak at the university to talk to a class of creative writing students who wanted to know how I'd written The Island and why. Anyway, so I delivered my talk, and can you hear me? Is that you can now? I'm not going to start again. I'll get on to the bit where I fell in love with Thessaloniki, so if you missed the fact that I didn't like it at all on that first glimpse, you'll be forgiven. Anyway, the following day, I had one more day in Thessaloniki before I had to return to London. And like any travel writer, as I used to be, I went for a walk to try and explore this city. And of course, what I saw was an extraordinary, for me, a very extraordinary combination of every different period of history. And I can't actually think of many places where, in the space of a 10-minute walk, you would see Roman architecture, where you'd see Byzantine, where you'd see Art Deco. And then, of course, even close to the city, the sort of 1970s apartment blocks that maybe the Greeks among you, perhaps a lot of you live in places like that in Thessaloniki, but I know a lot of British people find all those very identical blocks of flats slightly unattractive, but I even found those rather appealing, and I wondered what sort of people lived in Thessaloniki. There were two very specific things that I saw that day that perhaps made the most impact on me and really kind of ignited my interest and told me that in a space of literally those few hours that I would need to write about this place. And those were, first of all, the house on Pavlu Street, which was the birthplace of Mustafa Kemal. At that point, I mean, it sounds kind of, I'm embarrassed almost to admit it, but even 5 years ago, I had never really understood or even looked into the relationship between Turkey and Greece. And that visit to Kemal Atatürk's house basically opened up that story to me. For a start, I was the only person in the house. That was puzzling. I think it's changed now, but at the time when I went, the sign on the outside was in Turkish and English. I don't think then it was even in Greek. So I was a little bit mystified. I sort of they let me in and I handed in my passport. Again, I found that mysterious. And then I started to talk to the custodian in my then rather primitive Greek. And he wasn't having, or didn't understand, a word of it. And he spoke back to me in English, and I was a little bit put out because I was rather dying to practice my Greek. But I understood then that he was Turkish, he did not want to speak Greek to me. And I learnt, even on that day, quite a lot about the sort of personality of that man, and then went away and read what had taken place afterwards, the war with Turkey, the exchange of populations and so on, which I know everybody in this room will know a great deal more about than I do. But in an English school textbook, that might be a footnote, something that for Greece was that enormous, huge change forever. And it became for me a source of absolute fascination to try and understand what had taken place in Greece during the 20s and the very long-term effects of it. And the second thing I saw on that walk, again, I wasn't really using a guidebook because I didn't have time. I was literally just wandering. I walked down towards the sea, and as I came to the Eleftheria Platia, near the sea, I noticed from a distance a rather beautiful sculpture, a piece, I didn't know what it was. It looked a little bit like a tree, so I approached it. And of course, it's not really a tree. I mean, it's artistically created to look like a tree, but in fact, it's a sort of a number of bodies. I think if I describe them, they're sort of dancing, they're sort of writhing, they're upside down, they're in agony. And of course, that's the monument to the Jewish people of Thessaloniki. Again, that was a surprise. As a novelist, I think surprises are what kind of motivate me to write, really. They're these things that I come across, and I'm kind of surprised by my own ignorance, so I think if I'm surprised by this fact, other people might be, and I want to talk about them. And it was a surprise to me that there had been a Jewish population of such a size in Greece. I thought there were no Jews in Greece. I'd never actually met any Jewish people while I was there. And of course the answer is that the population of Jews is very, very small now, and this was why, because of what happened in the occupation. So that sort of 2 days, the strange kind of reason for going there to talk to creative writing students, which is it's a slight tangent, but I don't really believe in creative writing courses, so I felt a bit fraudulent, but I just used it as an excuse to go on a nice trip to Greece. And then my second day, when I discovered this amazing city, and came home and sort of knew that an obsession had begun. I always know when that happens to me, and it's at the beginning of the writing process for a book, when I wake up in the middle of the night and that's what I'm thinking about, and then when I wake up in the morning I'm still thinking about it. So my first thought after that visit to Thessaloniki was to write just about that 20-year period between the first big change, which was the departure of the Muslims, and then the second huge change, which was the departure of the Jews. But I very quickly discovered that the history of Thessaloniki didn't begin or end there, that I would need to continue to read about what happened after those events in Thessaloniki. So, as Anastasia described, the story sort of does cover almost a century of Thessaloniki history. My way of reading, people are always rather interested, I think, how, having been inspired, how I then continue to research a story. And it sounds incredibly easy, and it certainly is very enjoyable. What I do is wander about a lot, and I know that there are people in Thessaloniki who began to think I was a very strange person, a very unusual English woman who just sort of loitered about. You know, I never actually got arrested for loitering, but I know there are certain cafes that I've been to in Thessaloniki where they remembered me from one visit to the next. And one of the reasons for that, to the English members of the audience who may know this anyway, that there are certain Cafe Neon that you are not meant to go when you're a woman. And there's one called Assos. Does anybody know the Assos Cafe in Thessaloniki? I'm sure you might do. It's quite a big place on a main street. And I went in there the first summer when I was doing my research, otherwise known as wandering. And immediately I got in there, I realised I was, you know, uniquely among the clientele, a woman. And they served me eventually. A lot of the men in there were playing a card game on sort of green baize tablecloths. Anyway, they did serve me, and I drank the coffee very quickly and left. And about a year later, I went back there, and I felt a little bit more courageous. My Greek was slightly better, and I just wanted to ask these people a few questions. And I went in there, and I said, you know, may I have coffee? And the waiter said, I remember you. I said, do you remember me? And he said, well, the last time a woman came in here, it was you. And that's the odd thing. When you're a writer, when you're not, you can. I'm not really so unafraid to break the rules. You know, a respectable Greek woman probably wouldn't have gone into that cafe. But so anyway, that's just a glimpse of how I do my research. I sort of go into places that other people might not go. One of the things, having sort of decided to write this book, where I wanted to convey as much as I could what this extraordinary city had gone through in the space of a century. Obviously one needs to find something for characters to do. They can't just wander about the streets and have conversations. They have to be engaged in some kind of activity. Many of my characters, I realised I could engage them in the job of sewing, of embroidering ecclesiastical garments, of creating things for the synagogues, for the haute couture, for the army uniforms. In Thessaloniki, it seemed to me that everyone was busy with sewing. So that was rather a gift. And that really grew out of literally observation that in Thessaloniki there are an extraordinary number of beautiful clothes shops, places where you can actually go to have a dress made, and beautiful fabric shops. And if it's somewhere that you've grown up and lived in and know well, you might not have even noticed that, but as an outsider, that seemed to me extraordinarily beautiful. I can't think of really anywhere in London I could go where I'd see a similar display of embroidered tablecloths. It just doesn't exist. And when you are an outsider, you notice all these things. They become more vivid and actually more beautiful because there's something exceptional. On one of my, in fact, I think it might have been in the Assos Cafe, I once saw an elderly gentleman, and I do a lot of, and it does sound like I'm spying on people, and I suppose I am really. I saw an elderly gentleman, and I looked at him and thought, it's perfectly possible that you've lived through maybe 80, possibly 90 years of this city's history. I didn't actually speak to him, but he became my principal character, the character of Dimitri. And I'm sure there are probably many Dimitris, if they're from Thessaloniki in this room, in which case Fonya will laugh tomorrow. But I don't think it was any of you. I think I might recognise this elderly gentleman. But I looked at this man and I thought, as he got up, how different he looked from, let's say, probably even an 80-year-old in London. He was small, you know, he was smaller than I am, and I, in my imagination, guessed that he had lived through periods of great hardship, during the period when there was perhaps very little food, when all the refugees had arrived, and there might have been enough to go around. And then, of course, during the occupation, all this went through my head, and then during the Civil War. And that gentleman, probably not called Dimitri, but there's probably maybe a 20% chance he actually was called Dimitri, was an inspiration for me. Then I saw him, he went outside, and again, I don't follow people exactly. I'm not a stalker, but I do watch people. And he met his wife outside, and she again, similarly, was small, much smaller than a British person of the same age would be. And I named her, in my mind, Catalina, and he, of course, was Dimitri. I was trying to find, I just wanted to read something from the thread. I know that most of you know what Thessaloniki looks like, so I'm not going to read a description, a physical description of it. But it only just occurred to me this afternoon why I had written a particular character into the story. He's actually a blind man, and we kind of see him right at the beginning during the contemporary part of the story before we go into the tale of the city's history. And this young man can't actually see Thessaloniki. And I hadn't at the time realised quite why I'd written this bit in until kind of tonight, that I wanted to try and convey something about the atmosphere of Thessaloniki, which is not really to do with it's not to do with what it looks like, it's to do with how it feels, and the uniqueness of Thessaloniki, and how nowhere else feels like Thessaloniki, nowhere else looks like Thessaloniki, but it does have something that if you shut your eyes and somebody dropped you into Thessaloniki, maybe with some of the sounds mixed in, you might know where you were. So I'm just going to, if that's all right, I'm just going to read a little bit to you in English. Dimitri looked into a face that was younger than his own, and with almost translucent, sightless eyes. The skin was pale, and across one eye zigzagged a clumsily sewn scar. blind man smiled in Mitsos's direction. "I'm okay," he replied. "I come this way every day, but there's always something new to deal with." Cars thundered past on the brief stretch of road that took them to the next set of lights, almost drowning out Mitsos's next words. "Well, let me take you across the road at least." He took the blind man's arm and then they walked together to the other side. Though Mitsos could feel his confidence and determination and was almost embarrassed to have helped him. As they stepped onto the pavement opposite, he loosened his hold on the man's arm. Now their eyes seemed to meet. "Thank you." Mitsos realised there was a new danger for the blind man on this side of the road. Close by was a sheer drop into the sea. "You know the sea is right there, don't you?" "Of course I do. I walk here every day." Promenaders seemed lost inside their own worlds or immersed in their privately pounding music and were oblivious to the man's vulnerability. Several times his white stick caught their eye in the fraction of a second before a potential collision. "Wouldn't it be safer, less crowded to go elsewhere?" Mitsos asked him. "It would, but then I'd only seen more of this," he replied. The blind man indicated with a sweep of his arm the sea around him and the curving bay that stretched in a satisfying semicircle before them, and then pointed dead ahead to the snow-capped mountains that lay 100 kilometres away across the sea. Mount Olympus, this ever-changing sea, the tankers, the fishing vessels. I know you think I can't see them, but I could once. I know they are there, I still have them in my mind's eye, and I always will have. And it's not just what you're looking at, is it? Just close your eyes. The young man took Mitsos's hand and held on to it. Mitsos was surprised by the smooth marble coolness of his fine fingers and was grateful for the physical reassurance that he was not alone. He realised what it would be like to be standing there in the dark, a solitary, vulnerable figure on this busy esplanade. And in that moment, as his world went black, Mitsos felt his senses heighten. Noises that were loud became a deafening roar, and the heat of the sun on his head almost made him swoon. "Stay like this," urged the blind man, as Mitsos felt a momentary withdrawal from his grip, "just for a few minutes more." "Of course," Mitsos replied. "It's shocking how intense everything feels. I'm just trying to get used to it. I feel so exposed in this crowded place." Without opening his eyes, Mitsos could tell from the tone of the response that the man was smiling. "Just another moment, and then you will feel so much more." He was right. The strong smell of the sea, the dampness of the air on his skin, the rhythmic lap of the waves against the seawall were all magnified. And you realise it's different every day, every single day. In the summer, the air is so still and the water so flat, like oil, and I know the mountains disappear in the haze. The heat bounces off these stones and I feel it through the soles of my shoes. Both men stood facing out to sea. It could not be described as a typical Thessaloniki morning. As the man had said, no 2 days were ever the same, but there was one constant in the sweeping view laid out in front of them, a sense of both history and timelessness.